New Orleans Saints and Green Bay Packers defenses are still absolutely the talk of joint practices. However, New Orleans Saints offense still has some players that found ways to flash, and some of them are your favorite names. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints, your team every day.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, Crescent City Sports, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode, we're going to get you updated with everything going on in the second day of New Orleans Saints joint practices with the Green Bay Packers. We'll discuss some of the injuries that maybe are going to cause a little bit of concern going into the preseason game on Friday. We'll get into what to expect for Jameis Winston during that game as well. But first, the biggest story is all around that New Orleans Saints defense, where the standouts continue to be different every week. I'll tell you why that's important, and we'll break down a little bit about the starters over on the offensive side, some of your favorite names that, even though that New Orleans Saints offense is still looking for ways to rebound in these joint practices, still had some big standout moments. Lots to be excited about after watching 2 days of joint practices for this New Orleans Saints team. Make sure that you are getting your team every day in the chat. Jacqueline, I see you already dropping it in there. Lakita, I see you already dropping it in there as well. I appreciate y'all so much for being here for another episode. Don't forget to get your questions in the chat as well so I can answer them in tonight's episode. But let's go ahead and kick things off with the biggest story. Yeah, the New Orleans Saints defense, the Green Bay Packers defense, they should be the talk of these joint practices. However, some of your favorite players absolutely stood out over on the offensive side as well. Chris Olave, wide receiver, first round draft selection, top draft selection from the New Orleans Saints in this year's NFL draft. Absolutely probably had his best day, at least of the joint practices. Maybe had his best day in a while in training camp. And that's not to say that he had been underperforming before. It's just that today he continued to find his way open. He continued to show off his speed. One of the things that we saw again today, that we saw in yesterday's practice, was the way that the New Orleans Saints are utilizing Chris Olave's absolutely deadly speed and footwork by coming across the field, really maximizing the space that he gets to take advantage of, allowing him to create some natural separation simply with his speed against defenders. And we saw that again today, him making a big fourth down catch at one point to extend a drive when the Saints were into some of the simulations, 2-minute simulations, things like that. Had some nice plays in the red zone as well, drew a pass interference penalty in the back of the end zone. So just altogether a really, really fantastic day for the young rookie. One of the players that you absolutely want to see standing out over the course of camp, and it means even more to see him standing out in those joint practices when he's lining up against guys like Eric Stokes and Jair Alexander. That's a really good tandem of cornerbacks there, and really gives you an opportunity to kind of see what the barometer is in terms of where he is in his development. And so far, he's been able to pick up the playbook very quickly. He's been able to impact practices very quickly. And it's not just about the guys that he's already familiar with. You can see him also having that impact on guys that he's not so familiar with. So the next player that I would say, and speaking of big fourth down conversions, there was a huge one by tight end Lucas Krull, the undrafted free agent out of Pittsburgh. One of these other players that you absolutely want to see having a fantastic camp. You've got Nick Vanette, you've got Adam Troutman, you've got Juwan Johnson, as well as Taysom Hill. Those guys could very well make the roster going into 2022. But if you have an injury to any of those players, then in that case, who's going to be the one to step up? So having a guy like Lucas Krull on your roster or on the practice squad, those are absolutely, that's an absolutely good value player to have there. And the guy at 6'6", 250 plus pounds, having this outstanding fluidity and movement and footwork and all of that you see from him. I mean, it's pretty remarkable in terms of what it is that he's able to do and the way that he plays the game. So really, really great stuff from Lucas Krull. He had a huge catch on a 4th and long right over the middle of the field where he absolutely got pummeled, which was, by the way, our play of the day. We can just go ahead and break it down now. Play of the day. He ends up getting a pass from Ian Book over the middle of the field, and one of the safeties from the Green Bay Packers, I believe it was maybe Micah Abernathy. I want to say it was number 46. I can't remember, but just put an absolutely unnecessary hit on him over the middle. I mean, it's practice, as Allen Iverson would say. But he put a big time lick on him over the middle of the field. And Lucas Krull, who's not expecting to be hit during practice, that's, kind of running the route and, expects to make the catch and maybe just be wrapped up or something like that, gets absolutely leveled over the middle of the field, pops back up. And this is all happening in 2-minute drill situation. So he just pops back up, gets the ball to the referee, gets lined up, and they continue to run the plays. Really like veteran mentality stuff from Lucas Krull. So really, really good to say, or really, really good to see. Lucas, stop calling me Nick Ross Krull, by the way, his full name. Officially. And then another player that had a really nice standout day today was Mark Ingram. He had a couple of really nice plays in the red zone, popped off a big run. Tony Jones Jr. had a couple of big runs as well. Alvin Kamara had a couple of big catches as well. And Adam Troutman even with a big jump, jump ball catch that would have walked in for a touchdown from Andy Dalton in team drills in the red zone. So lots of really, really good performances by some of the players that the Saints need big performances from in the 2022 season on the offensive side. Even though the offense has struggled over the course of camp, just like with the Green Bay Packers offense today, you saw some of those big pop moments from all of those players. The thing that I love about, I see somebody checking in from Denmark. That's incredible. Lars, thank you so much for being here. The thing that I love about the Saints defense, though, is that as the Saints defense continues to stand out, we're hearing new names every day. There are some players that are consistent standouts, of course, guys like Peyton Turner, as well as who's been a little bit quiet over the course of joint practices, but him as well as Paulson Adebo, who had a pass breakup today, but could have been an interception, right? And that was on a 3rd and long. And a lot of us in New Orleans media, we kind of looked around and we said, okay, well, you give Aaron Rodgers another chance, he's going to take advantage of it. But then what happens? Malcolm Roach busts through and gets a sack to end the drive. Malcolm Roach has been one of the new names that has popped here recently over the course of training camp. Caden Ellis getting humongous praise from Dennis Allen over the course of today's pressers following practice. And, so the thing that I love is that you're seeing these names, you're seeing players that are popping from the Saints defense that you don't see consistently, which is good. Marcus Maye having an interception today as well. Every day, it seems like somebody new is hitting over on the defensive side, and that's a really, really great place for you to be if you're the New Orleans Saints. Another really great place for you to be if you're the New Orleans Saints is to have your starting quarterback present during practice. Jameis Winston has been present, but hasn't been participating, so should you expect to see him on Friday? I'll tell you exactly why you shouldn't as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. But we get to talk about all of these fantastic players and this fantastic team thanks to our friends over at Elias. And I want to make sure you're checking out that Elias Game Plan app. Look, I love stats. I love info. Anytime that you've seen a bunch of stuff from like ESPN stats and info and stuff like that, it's all Elias. You'll see it per Elias. This incredible thing happened today. And they just know. They just have all that information. They've got everything in terms of making sure that you have something in your hands now, because you can download that Elias Game Plan app on your phone, and then all of a sudden you have the ultimate sports betting, the ultimate fantasy companion for the NFL, the NBA, and the MLB. We're talking about the official statisticians of the U.S. pro sports leagues in your pocket. How insane is that? It's really, really cool. So make sure you go and check it out. You're going to get a bunch of different stuff. They're your one-stop source and shop for things like player news, league-validated player stats, and team records, expert analysis for betting, building your fantasy team, and even just impressing your friends as well. So go and check them out today. Take my advice here. Download the Elias Game Plan app right away. New features available all of the time to make sure you take your game to the next level. The NFL season is right around the corner, so don't wait. Find the Elias Game Plan app on the App Store and the Google Play Store today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thanks again, as always, for being here, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Appreciate all of you who are here checking out the live show today. If you have questions, make sure you drop them in the chat, and I'll get to them in the evening episode, the pre-record episode. We're going to get to stuff like attendance, injuries, participation, and everything here in just a moment. But first, the big thing that I want to highlight next is whether or not you should expect to see Jameis Winston going into Friday's preseason game. And the answer is no. Look, this doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with Jameis Winston that's beyond, just minor injury that they're managing, right? This doesn't mean that there's like long-term bad news for Jameis Winston. The fact of the matter is that Jameis Winston was out there today. He was running, he was moving well, he was throwing, doing routes on air, stuff like that. In terms of the walkthroughs, he was out there as well, working with the offense. So he was still there getting work in, which is good, but he just didn't participate in team drills, red zone drills, 2-minute drills, stuff like that, which is not the end of the world and not really anything you need to be super concerned about. If we don't see Jameis Winston on the field in New Orleans Saints jersey at all this preseason, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden he's going to be in a bad way going into week one. Right? We saw, Jameis Winston last year who had his highest touchdown percentage, lowest interception percentage, and one of the best red zone passer ratings in the NFL in 2022. That's the guy that you're taking into the 2022 season, regardless of whether or not he participates in one of 3 preseason games. It doesn't matter. So there's nothing really to be concerned about there. The big thing is, can he get some practice reps next week before the Chargers game on that final week, that final preseason game? And even if you get to that point, right, you get to the that preseason game and all, does he get snaps? Maybe, right? You can see him maybe get like a drive or something like that, but is it necessary? I wouldn't say so. I think give Andy Dalton more opportunities, figure out what you've got in Ian Book, even get KJ Costello in there, even though we haven't seen him take a single snap at quarterback just yet throughout practice and everything. But don't be surprised if you're not seeing Jameis Winston there, but don't take it to be the end of the world either. It's not bad news. They're taking their time to make sure they have the most important player at the most important position ready to go week one up against the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta. That is the primary objective. Linebackers, let's come back to this here for a second, because Dennis Allen commented on one of the things that was really unique about the linebacker position going into 2022. And I know a lot of people, wish that the Saints would have brought back Quan Alexander. There's no telling whether or not they had conversations with him and he just didn't like the role that they were offering him or something like that. But you hear Demario Davis talk about how important the defensive line is in front of them. And if the defensive line is getting pressure, if they're limiting the run, all of that, then all of a sudden the linebackers' jobs become easier. The secondary's job becomes easier. Dennis Allen saying basically Demario Davis doesn't get 100+ sacks and Marshall Lattimore doesn't intercept passes if there's not a pass rush, if there's not a defensive line there. So it all starts and ends with the defensive line. But the linebacker position has been one that we've been paying a lot of attention to over the course of this offseason because there was no Quan Alexander in the building. Demario Davis is one of the best players in the NFL. One of the best players, if not the best player on the New Orleans Saints defense, if not the best player on the New Orleans Saints team. And then you look at sort of the big question mark there about was Pete Werner ready to step into his role? Well, Pete Werner might have been ready to step into the role, but he's been dealing with a groin injury. And if we know anything about groin injuries, they don't go away quickly, right? So the groin injury kept him out at the very beginning of training camp. He had about 4 full practices and then now has gone back to dealing with that injury. And it's something you have to manage. It doesn't just fully go away right away, right? You have to manage that. So it could be that the Saints are also being really cautious there, but it does beg the question, what do you do now at linebacker? And I asked Dennis Allen a little bit about the mentality behind the guys that they've signed so far, bringing back Chase Hansen, who I would now consider an NFL veteran, right? Several years in the NFL, has a lot of experience in the New Orleans Saints system. There's good reason to call him a veteran at this point. But they also sign in, of course, John Bostic. They bring back Kiko Alonso, who, of course, was only able to do a day before he was like, hey, I'm not really into this anymore. I'm kind of done here. But, you look at these two things here and you say, okay, so veteran experience has become important all of a sudden at the second level. So I asked Dennis Allen about it. And one of the things he said was, he was like, I'm going to tell you what's unique about this New Orleans Saints linebacker core. And it's that you've got 2 proven guys. You've got Demario Davis, who's absolutely proven. You've got Pete Werner, who you like a lot in terms of the role that you've seen him in. But then after that, you're trying to answer questions about the rest of the guys. But he did single out Caden Ellis. And we know that Caden Ellis has been a Locked On Saints favorite since before he was drafted. But Caden Ellis is a player that he feels has really grown into his role and has taken a lot of steps forward and has really made strides, is the way that Dennis Allen described it. So I asked him to kind of elaborate on that a little bit. What do you mean make strides? Where specifically have you seen it? And he specifically mentioned Caden Ellis in off-ball linebacker situations. We know Caden Ellis can be very good up against the line of scrimmage. We know he's very disciplined in run fits. We know that he is a good pass rusher. You think back to that New England Patriots game where he put the pressure on Mac Jones that became the pick six by Malcolm Jenkins, right? So you look at all of that and you think about where it is that Caden Ellis can develop, and it is in coverage. And so far, Dennis Allen says that he's seen that, his ability to move and his ability to cover in space, line up against tight ends, things like that. So beside those three guys, what is the next thing you have to figure out? The way that Dennis Allen highlighted it is, if one of those guys goes off the field, who steps in, and where do you have the least significant drop-off going to any type of backup? So you think about guys like Chase Hansen, who has a lot of experience in the system, Eric Wilson, who's an NFL veteran, and then now John Bostic, who's an NFL veteran, Zach Bond, who of course has a lot of experience with the team, Andrew Dowell, who the team absolutely loves. Some version, configuration of three of those five players seem to be the most likely to end up being your depth behind your three starters in Demario Davis, Pete Werner, once he's healthy, and Caden Ellis. So I think that the Saints feel good about where they are in terms of the players they can figure out there, but don't be surprised if they continue to add more veteran options to see if there's something else that they can learn, even just as a barometer in terms of what they need to learn from the younger guys, to have the veteran guys that you can see adapt to the system quickly and say, okay, so what's happening there that's not happening with these younger guys, things like that. So really just interesting stuff. And I like Eric Wilson. I have been saying it since they signed Eric Wilson, that Eric Wilson will make the 53-man roster. I stand by that. I think he will. I think it's going to be hard to keep Chase Hansen off the roster. And then so you're really just looking at one more linebacker spot. So who's that other linebacker? Does a veteran like John Bostic get there, or does somebody with more experience within the system like Zach Bond get there? That's why training camp is important. Coming up next, we're going to dive into attendance. And we saw a few more players present but not participating. What does that mean for the New Orleans Saints, and what does it mean for the preseason game upcoming? We'll break all of that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, it's a good opportunity for me to be able to tell you about our good friends over at Bet Online, your number one source for all your sports wagering information, sports wagering podcasts, sports wagering, fill in the blank. They've got everything for you. They also have everything you can imagine in terms of odds as well, team win totals, spreads for games that are, months away at this point, preseason game spreads if you're a sicko like I am. You have a bunch of other things you can look at in terms of NBA, MLB, NHL, combat sports, golf, whole bunch of stuff that you can check out. You can find reviews and news of every league, every moment. You can also get into everything that you need in terms of all of your sports news and events. Number one source on all your odds, lines, and props as well. So you can check them out on your mobile device and learn more about all of the trends in action that are happening today. It's Bet Online, where the game starts. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. We are wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with a look at attendance and participation. A couple of different things to highlight here, but there have been some concerns around injury in the tackle position now all of a sudden for the New Orleans Saints. It was a busy day for tackles Lewis Kidd and Trevor Penning, who got a lot of reps today. So let's talk a little bit, or let's break down a little bit in terms of what you need to know here. So the players that we did not see at practice: linebacker Pete Werner, tackle Ryan Ramczyk, offensive lineman Forrest Lamp, and then defensive tackle Jaleel Johnson. Pete Werner, Ryan Ramczyk, the two most concerning names out of there. Ramczyk, though, we saw yesterday, we talked to him after practice, everything looked fine. We know that he's on kind of that ramp up that's a little bit like on and off over the course of the offseason so far as well. So maybe that's a factor in that it was an off day for him, period. Some players that we did see but didn't participate in practice were Jameis Winston, quarterback, as we discussed, running back Dwayne Washington, who's probably in the lead right now when it comes to RB3. I did see him off to the sideline. He looked in good spirits, things like that. So it didn't seem like that was much of a big deal. Chase Hansen was dressed but not in pads, so he didn't participate, but he was present. Landon Young, same thing, dressed, not in pads. Andrus Peat, dressed, not in pads, present, didn't participate. So you'll notice here that I said Ryan Ramczyk was not spotted. Landon Young did not participate. Andrus Peat, who has tackle versatility, did not participate. So imagine the concern when you see James Hurst and Trevor Penning walk off the field with trainers within about 3 or 4 plays. All of a sudden now you've got Lewis Kidd and Sage Doxeter taking tackle reps. Sage Doxeter was at left tackle. Lewis Kidd was at right tackle. These guys are both undrafted free agent rookies coming into the season. Then all of a sudden, Sage Doxeter, big number 79, comes walking off the field with the trainer. Thankfully, at the same time, Trevor Penning, number 70, comes jogging back out. The New Orleans Saints' second of 2 first-round selections, player you really want to see out there. Dennis Allen credited both Lewis Kidd and Trevor Penning for their ability to battle through and get all of those reps, battle through all of those reps. So they got a lot of work over the course of this practice. And they had some good reps, and they had some reps where they struggled. All of that as well against first team pass rushers from the Green Bay Packers. So you're going to hear a lot about a lot of sacks given up in this practice. Don't be surprised by that. You had, for a little while, your 4th or 5th in line tackles at both sides. So don't be surprised by that. Don't be discouraged by that. Doesn't mean that the New Orleans Saints offense is going to be terrible in 2022 or anything like that. It's just a specific situation. So Lewis Kidd, Trevor Penning getting a lot of reps today was a good thing to see Trevor Penning get all of those reps. He had some wins. He had some losses. Again, the up and down, as you expect from a rookie. I'm really excited to see him on Friday, though, going up against the Green Bay Packers in a game situation. The last thing that I want to mention here is today's lanyap. I'm so glad that we added this to the show. So today's lanyap is pretty simple. The split focus of joint practices are a challenge. Demario Davis talked about it a little bit today. He mentioned during his presser that these split practices are things to where you're trying to get ready for the Friday preseason game, but you're also trying to stay steps ahead and get ready for the season as well. You can't develop expectations off of it, right? No, the New Orleans Saints offense is going to be X in the regular season based upon an Andy Dalton-led first team without Ryan Ramczyk and now without, James Hurst for a little while, things like that, right? Like you can't really take copy and paste and say, okay, well, these are the expectations for the regular season based upon what you see in the preseason, or not the preseason, but also joint practices. But the thing to remember with joint practices is that a guy like Demario Davis is trying to stay in shape, trying to be ready for the 2022 NFL season here in August 17th, going into a preseason game. So there's a little bit of a split focus that's happening. And I think that has to happen over on the coaching side as well, because you're trying to also get as much opportunity to figure out who's going to be, even just make up your roster in 2022 and where those camp battles are and things like that from the coaching perspective, which, will oftentimes stay insulated within the coaching. And then at the same time, you're trying to get ready for a preseason game this weekend. And now you have a preseason game to where James Hurst left with an injury that Dennis Allen described only as foot, right? It was some kind of a foot injury. You have Sage Doxeter leave with what looked like a left arm injury, but we're just seeing things at that point. So you have to figure out exactly who are the guys that are going to be able to be healthy enough to get reps going into Friday's game, knowing you don't have a practice between now and then too. So there's just a lot of that sort of split focus that has to happen for these players as well as these coaches. So fun to watch, fun to talk about, but I imagine very challenging to be a part of. All right, y'all, coming up later on tonight, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into our look at the New Orleans Saints offensive weapons that have had nice performances over the course of these joint practices, what it means going into Friday, who you should be keeping an eye out on, and why Chris Olave might be the most important piece going into Friday in terms of who we're zeroing in on. And then we'll also break down a little bit more from what we saw from the defense today as well. And of course, answer all of your questions. Make sure you get your questions in the live chat here. Thanks again for being a part of this live show and for making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. For your second listen, make sure you go check out Locked On Fantasy Football, Locked On Dynasty Football. Get all the information you need so that you can be ready to dominate your fantasy football leagues, including upcoming top 10 lists at each position to get you ready for draft week. So a whole bunch coming on the Locked On Fantasy Football, Locked On Dynasty Football podcast, which you can find wherever you get this podcast, whether it be podcast provider or on YouTube as well. I appreciate you so much for making me a part of your day, part of your routine, saying yes to me and this show. I appreciate you so much for always saying hi when you see me as well. Don't forget that you're always welcome to do that. And of course, if you have any questions around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.